Welcome everybody. Our annual general meeting is being held on the land of the Wurundjeri, and I would like to acknowledge the Wurundjeri people who are the traditional custodians of this land. I would also like to pay respect to the elders, both past and present, of the Kulin Nation, and extend that respect to other Indigenous Australians present. As I'm sure you all know, we are meeting in this very special centenary year, 2015, when we have been celebrating the creation of this institute all those years ago. But doesn't time fly? It seems like only 6 months ago we had our last annual general meeting. And this, of course, is because of our decision to move our financial year end from 30 June to 31 December. And I can only assure you on behalf of the board, we won't be moving our financial year end for a long time to come. It's just what we needed amongst all the other things that were going on around the Institute. I'm particularly pleased to be able to welcome such a wide cross-section of our stakeholders to this annual meeting. And it's a very broad group. It includes past directors of the Institute and the families of past directors, family members of the late Don Metcalfe, staff, supporters, representatives of government, trusts and foundations, as well as individual owners, and last but not least, all members of the Institute who are joining us here tonight. And I'd particularly like to welcome those board members who are here and to thank them especially for their contribution in what has been a very demanding period over the last several months. There are some special welcomes tonight, and I'm very pleased to announce and introduce the new members of the Institute. And I've been asked, if you're present, if you would just briefly stand when I call out your name. So we have Professor Graham Brown, Mrs. Rosalind Brown, Mrs. Jill Carter, Paul Fraser, Maureen Grant, Belinda Lawson, Joe Marshall, Joe Metcalfe, Johanna Metcalfe, Kate Metcalfe, and Marianne Metcalfe, Maureen O'Keefe, and Malcolm Williamson. So welcome again to you all. And last but not least, a very, very special welcome to John Chatterton and his wife Val, because John is chair of our founder, the Walter and Eliza Hall Trust. And we're delighted he can be with us. And as I said to him earlier, we've asked him to sing briefly for his supper, and we look forward to hearing from him later in the meeting. The latter half of 2014 does almost seem like a full year rather than just a 6-month period, because it continued to be a very challenging one for medical research institutes in Australia. Budget uncertainties, as we all know, persisted at the federal level, particularly with respect to the proposed Medical Research Future Fund. We now hope that this will be created by the announced target of 1 August with its proposed initial corpus of $3.4 billion. And if that is confirmed, that will certainly start a transformation for the sector. Closer to home, a new Victorian state government has been sworn in, and their first budget included some useful initiatives for the sector, particularly with respect to the coordination of clinical trial research in this part of town, and a grant of $25 million to establish the Melbourne Genomics Health Alliance, which WeHi will host. But there is more that needs to be done if Melbourne is to retain its deserved reputation as a high-quality medical research centre. The extraordinary and continuing achievements of the Institute's scientists and those who've supported them since we started are the foundations of this institute's reputation and how it's been built and maintained. We are particularly conscious of the extraordinary philanthropic support and the collaboration with other organisations which has underpinned our growth and success over the past century. It's remarkable to look at the Institute's first financial accounts, partly because of their simplicity, but also because, and they were July 1917, but also because in those accounts, in those very few words that are in them, we see 4 familiar names that have been involved with us all the way. There's obviously the Walter and Eliza Hall Fund. The University of Melbourne had contributed some income as well. The Melbourne Hospital, as it was then known, we gave them back some money on account of building and equipment. And the one I found most fascinating was that we received £8 from the Serum Institute, now CSL, which was to help offset the costs of the Institute's charwoman. Now, our relationship with CSL has changed, but it's still there. But it's a great reminder that while government funding is clearly critical to medical research institutes, the real edge is provided by the philanthropists and other collaborators with whom we've worked for so many years. For every dollar we get from government, we need additional income from our endowment earnings or from our supporters to help close the widening gap between available funds and the cost of world-class research. This, I have to say, is something we believe the state government could help us with more, as is happening in Queensland and New South Wales, and hopefully fill part of that gap, as I say. But also our centenary fellowships, which we're focusing on in our fundraising activities, are aimed at filling another gap in government funding, that being to help the development of bright but yet to be established science talent. Against this background, we've completed our strategic review, and I think you've all been given copies as you've come in. And we've formulated the strategic priorities that we will pursue over the next 5 years. We're delighted to be able to share these with you this evening, and Doug will touch on this more in his remarks. But our hope is that as a consequence, new supporters will be attracted to the wonderful work of our scientific team. I'd like to conclude my remarks at this stage by asking you to join me in congratulating the Institute's Director, Doug Hilton, who continues to lead not only the Institute, but also now the sector through his chairmanship of the Australian Association of Medical Research Institutes, and he does so in outstanding fashion through these challenging times. So thank you again for your attendance this evening, and I now hand over to the Institute's Treasurer, Rob Wiley.
Thank you, Mr. President, and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It gives me great pleasure to ask you to receive and consider the Statement of Financial Position, the Statement of Profit and Loss and other comprehensive income, the Statement of Cash Flows and the reports of the Directors and of the Auditor in respect of the 6 months ended 31 December 2014. As the Chairman has already stated, and as stated in the notice of meeting, the Institute has now changed its annual financial reporting period from a year end of 30th of June to 31 December. This period fits more effectively with the timing of government grants, and accordingly, in the transition to a calendar year reporting cycle, we're reporting on a 6-month period only. The net surplus for the 6-month period was $220,000, and it's slightly higher than the $147,000 earned in the previous 12 months. The total comprehensive income for the 6-month period was $1.2 million, and this compares to $15.7 million in the previous 12 months, which included a substantial amount of unrealized upward movement in the value of our investment portfolio. The value of securities in our investment portfolio was $210.6 million at 31 December, and the Board Investment Committee prudently approved the sale of certain investments towards the year end, thereby decreasing the value of securities by $7.3 million over the 6-month period. However, cash holdings in the portfolio increased by $9.5 to $11.1 million in December 2014, and so on a combined securities and cash basis, the investment portfolio increased by a net $2.2 million. I think it's appropriate to thank those members of the financial community who so graciously give of their time to serve on the investment committee. And today, I would like to pay particular tribute to the service of Stephen Daly. Stephen was a founding member of the committee in 1987 until his retirement in late 2014. And during his remarkable 27 years commitment to the committee, Stephen contributed a wealth of valuable financial expertise for which the Institute is most grateful, and we wish him well in his retirement. Infrastructure funding is always critical, and we are again pleased to acknowledge the support of the Victorian and federal governments in this regard. The external audit performed by Deloitte Touche Tohmatsu progressed smoothly, and there are no matters of major concern to report. The Deloitte partner, Tom Beasy, is here today and can answer any questions members may have on the audit. In our centenary year, I would like to acknowledge the fine service that Deloitte and its antecedents firms have provided to the Institute as external auditor since our establishment. The President referred to the first financial report in 1997, which was signed off as auditor by Mr. W.M. Jarvie on the 9th of August 1917, when the Institute's annual income was the princely sum of £7,783. Members of the Institute, I now move that the statement of financial position, it used to be called the balance sheet, which I think is a much better description, but no, that's another matter. The statement of profit and loss and other comprehensive income, the statement of cash flows, and the reports of the directors and of the auditor for the financial period ended December 2014 be received and adopted. Do I have a seconder? Thank you. Are there any questions? If there are no questions, then I will put the motion. All members in favour, please raise your hand. Against? Carried. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Mr. President.
Just to continue these somewhat arcane formalities, due to the Institute's decision to move to a 31 December year, as Rob's explained, it was required to produce the financial results and also another annual report. And so it gives me great pleasure to move formally the acceptance and adoption of the annual report for the period ended 31 December 2014. Do I have a seconder, please? Thank you, Joan. Those who, we also have a number of proxies, I think, supporting the adoption of the annual report, but those in favour of its adoption, could you please raise your hands? Those against? I declare the resolution carried. Enough of this. Over to Doug Hilton for the Director's report.
Thanks, Chris. What a special AGM. I think AGMs are always special. They always make my palms a little sweaty. I think I said that 7 years ago at my first annual general meeting. Giving a seminar to scientific colleagues, perhaps several thousand of them in an auditorium, is one thing. But talking at an AGM where you see your colleagues the next day and they make comment on your performance is another thing. I'd like to start by acknowledging the President of our board, the Presidents of our board, past and present, Chris Thomas, Leon Davis, Bruce Teal and Sir Andrew Grimwade, who've not only provided wonderful leadership but have also been very generous donors. And I'd like to also acknowledge our other board members that are here tonight, past and present. I'd like to acknowledge the three organisations that had the foresight to create the Institute 100 years ago, 100 years and 1 month ago. And they, of course, are the University of Melbourne, the Royal Melbourne Hospital and the Walter and Eliza Hall Trust. And like Chris, John and Val, welcome. I'd like to acknowledge our past directors that are here, Gus and Suzanne. And really specially the family of our inaugural director-designate, Gordon Clooney's Mackay Matheson, who was killed 100 years ago last Monday from a wound received in Gallipoli, and the families of all 5 of our past directors, especially Rowena McKeon, who is the daughter of our first director, Sydney Patterson, and who's travelled from Tasmania with her husband, John, to be here tonight. And I'd like to especially acknowledge and welcome the family of our dear friend and colleague, Don Metcalfe, Joe, Joanna and Marianne. Welcome. An annual general meeting in its centenary year gives me a little bit more licence than normal to reflect on our history and also allows us, I think, to ponder our future. And what I wanted to do was to reflect briefly on what has made the Institute a special place. I think the first thing that strikes many visitors to the Institute, especially those from the corporate world, and it was commented on this week to me, is how long people work here. We've had just 6 directors in 100 years, and researchers like Don Metcalfe and Jacques Miller and a lot of others have worked here for more than 50 years. That boggles the mind of a lot of people that come to the Institute. Those long time frames are special in research because they allow us to tackle big problems, and that is one of the special things about the Institute, is that the researchers in the Institute tackle big problems, and that's an important aspect of what's made the Institute a special place. The second thing that strikes me about the Institute is the deep-seated collaborative culture. And again, it sets it apart from a lot of places I've worked, and I know a lot of places that our researchers have come from or gone to transiently. And you've heard me talk about this often, how important collaboration is, and it manifests in different ways. At a strategic level, it allows us the ability to bring together people with vastly different backgrounds, expertise, different ways of looking at the world, to work together on difficult challenges. At a more prosaic level, and you've heard me talk about this, it's the expectation that any member of our staff, even the most inexperienced undergraduate students, and we're joined by some of them tonight, can knock on the door of a scientist who might have been working here for 50 years and expect to be treated courteously, generously and with time, and that doesn't happen in many places. It's perhaps not surprising that this ethos of collaboration is ingrained, and it was discussed explicitly from the beginning of the Institute. And I want to quote from a history of the Institute by a PhD graduate who wrote her thesis in the 1970s. Her name was Vivian Duval Davis, and she noted that Patterson, our first director, proposed a concept of teamwork which has remained an essential part of the attributes of researchers at the Institute. I think we owe Patterson a debt of gratitude for taking us down the first steps of this path. The final thing I wanted to reflect on is our financial position. 2015 is a tough year financially, not just for the Institute, but for the whole medical research sector. And I think sometimes there's a tendency to look back on past years with rose-coloured glasses, remembering fondly the times of plenty when the NH&MRC seemed like a magic pudding. But it was never so. And again, I'd like to quote from Davis's history of the Institute, written in 1978. That was 40 years ago. The Walter and Eliza Hall Institute has survived and thrived over 60 years on precarious funding. I think we can update that to 100 years. The quality of its achievements has been unaffected by the lack of a firm financial base. And head of our investment committee keeps telling me that the endowment is not of a suitable size to sustain an institute like this. $210 million is good, but for an institute of 1,000 people and a turnover of $105 million a year, Rob keeps telling me it's a precarious base. I digress. Coming back to the quote, the quality of its achievements has been unaffected by the lack of a firm financial base. In later years, the contributions from NH&MRC have provided the salaries of many scientists and technicians. However, these contributions have always provided less than half of the total expenditure, and the Institute therefore must rely heavily on overseas and private funding. A sense of insecurity has resulted, and an extra burden has been placed on the senior men. I like that little bit. Things have changed a little bit. As costs escalate and greater sums have to be found, more and more time must be spent on grant seeking, something that all of the researchers can sympathise with. At no time has this led to a deterioration of the science, but the search for finance has been more and more demanding at the Hall Institute than any other research organisation in Australia. I'm not sure that's quite true today, but I have to say that the preoccupation with finding money is tiring, and it's a big drain on productivity. I guess my message to the researchers is we've got through it before. Research is a wonderful game. You work at a wonderful institute. Keep your chins up. We've got through the tough times before, mainly because we've had the support of people in the community like the ones that are here today. And I do like the reflection because it gives me, and I hope also all of the scientists and students, great hope. Smart people with their eye on interesting research questions can make it in a place like this institute because we do stick together and because we have the support of wonderfully generous people in the community who keep us going through the ups and downs, not only of experimental research, but also the financial situation. I think the essential nature of the partnership between innovative, creative, driven researchers of all ages and passionate and visionary supporters was just as true when the Institute began. It was true through the Patterson and Kellaway years. It was true in the aftermath of the Great War, through the Depression and into the Second World War, through the halcyon years of Burnett, Nossal and Corey, and it's true today as we seek to support our researchers through a time where only 1 in 6, or perhaps this year 1 in 10 grants to the NH&MRC will be successful. And I'm sure it's going to be true off and on for the next 100 years. What's really pleasing is that we have a stunningly talented group of scientists of all ages, and that becomes really obvious when we look at the public recognition that group of scientists and students have attained over the last 6 months. You can see a number of the prizes that our researchers have won, and I only want to pick out 4 because they represent the talent we have across research generations at the Institute and also across our research themes. Julia Machingo is an immunologist and a PhD student, and she received the 2014 Pitchie Award for excellence in cancer research. Greg Ebert is a postdoctoral fellow who's done some beautiful work with Mark Pellegrini on curing infectious disease like hepatitis B and HIV, and who won the Bupa Emerging Researcher Award, a national prize. Peter Zabatar, one of our recently appointed lab heads, a structural biologist who is working on the mechanisms of cell death and survival, was awarded the Gottschalk Medal of the Australian Academy of Science. And I'd also like to mention Jeff Lindeman, Andrew Roberts and Len Harrison, a division head, the head of our clinical translation and a retired division head, each of whom were recognised for their outstanding translational research, straddling life in the lab and life in the hospital by being elected Fellows of the new Australian Academy of Health and Medical Sciences. I'd like to ask everybody on the list to stand up, and I'd like to ask all of you to join me in congratulating them. I think this shows why I'm so optimistic, and that is it highlights the depth of not only our current leadership, but also our emerging leadership that will be so important to our success for the next 50 years. As we look to the future, perhaps not the 50-year horizon, but the 5-year horizon, we've developed our second and refreshed strategic plan. First, I'd like to thank all of you, the board, staff, students, our precinct partners, our supporters in the community for your contributions. The plan is much, much better because of your input. Thank you. I'd also like to particularly thank Kylie Orman and Catherine Parker for their efforts. There's nothing more exhausting than herding cats, and at least when it comes to herding, academics are almost entirely feline. I'd like to share some of the elements of our plan with you. We do face challenges. These will come as no surprise to you, and you've heard me talk about most of them over the last 6 years. I'll just let you ponder on those for a moment. As an institute, our goals remain similar, and I want to stress how important it is that we aspire to do research which, on the one hand, changes the way that we and other researchers view the world. That is, it really shapes scientific thought internationally. But on the other hand, also repays the trust of the community by improving disease prevention, diagnosis and treatment, which after all is why medical research is so supported by the Australian community. Various directors have sometimes emphasised one of these goals more strongly than the other. However, I'm certain that we're at our best as an institute when we focus on and celebrate both of these. I think that's a really important message. One change of emphasis that has occurred in the last 5 years, and you can tell that a little bit from the content of the annual general meetings, is that we've shifted from a focus on our building program, which preoccupied us probably for the last 5 or 10 years in different ways, to a future that is much more focused on staff and students. That is, ensuring we bring into the Institute the brightest and best people, both in the non-research side and at every level of research: undergraduate, PhD, postdoc, lab head and division head. We want these people to have their skills developed here, their talents refined and their leadership honed, and for these people to contribute to the Institute in the long term or take up opportunities elsewhere that allow them to fulfil their ambitions. It's with this focus in mind that we've sought to use the celebration of our centenary to raise funds for 100 new fellowships over the next 5 years. These centenary fellowships for early career researchers, postdoctoral scientists and lab heads will provide support for 5 years and are a smart investment in our future and the future of the Australian health and medical research sector. I'm sure that in addition to doing fantastic research, our centenary fellows will be the research leaders of the next 50 years. And I'm delighted that in the first 5 months of this campaign, which has been relatively low-key to date, we've been able to secure funding for 10 fellowships. I think that's a wonderful outcome. On behalf of the Institute, and especially the young researchers who will be supported, I'd like to thank the following people and organisations for their incredible generosity, because they're an inspiration. The Walter and Eliza Hall Trust, thank you. The Dyson Bequest, the Lou Cardy Charitable Fund and the Alfred Felton Bequest and their associated trustees. Jane Hemstridge, who's recently joined our board. Thank you, Jane. And to 2 of our long-standing research partners that Chris mentioned, CSL and the University of Melbourne, who have generously both agreed to fund 2 fellowships. The university's fellowships is to be for clinician scientists, and these were announced on Monday, and they're in memory of Gordon Clunes Mackay Matheson, who was medically trained at the university, and as I mentioned, was killed in Gallipoli, and was to be the Institute's inaugural director. I'd like you to join me in thanking these donors, and I'd also like you to put aside the date of November 19th. This is about the time of year we used to have our AGM, and we're going to use this time to celebrate our research and researchers, and I'd like to use that time to introduce you to our first batch of Centenary Fellows. So to our donors and supporters that have made those first 10 fellowships possible, thank you. The other element of the strategic plan that's important is the investment in technology. Over the years, the Institute has waxed and waned in its investment in technology. Burnett was pretty conservative in this regard, and Gus commented this in one of the histories I read. His view was that there are disadvantages to elaborate apparatus which must not be forgotten. There is inevitably a danger that anyone working with the apparatus is likely to become so immersed in technical detail that he will tend to forget the primary function of the apparatus as a tool for biological research. I think this might have actually been one of the few things that Don Metcalfe and Mac Burnett agreed on. And although we can become enamoured with technology for its own sake, I'm absolutely certain that we achieve our best results as an institute when we bring together researchers with a deep understanding and passion for biology or clinical disease, people like Don, with those at the forefront of a new technology who are not just using the latest equipment, but also pushing the boundaries of what that equipment can do. We've come a long way over the last 5 years in investing in technology, and with your continued support, I hope these facilities will continue to develop. And while I'm pleased with our progress, we'll especially focus on a few of our facilities, our imaging facility and fax facility, our proteomics facility and genomics facility. And with your help, we will also expand our numbers of people working in bioinformatics and computational biology, which as we begin to generate more and more massive sets of data are just the crucial links in the research pipeline. And we will continue to invest in high-throughput screening and medicinal chemistry, which enhance our ability to translate our insights on disease mechanism into potential new medicines. Finally, you've heard me talk a lot about the values that encapsulate the Institute. As part of this plan, we've captured these. Perhaps when we were a small institute of less than a couple of hundred people, where everyone knew everyone else's name and background, these values could remain implicit and be passed on organically. But in a place that has 1,000 people on payroll, where I wonder even whether Gus could remember everybody's name, it's important to spell the values out in black and white and then ensure as best we can that we live by them. Thank you.
Thank you, Doug. Opportunity if anyone has any questions of the Director.
Leon Davis isn't here, so I'm hoping Ashley Dunn won't ask anything on climate change.
If not, thank you, David.
Thank you, Chris. Yep.
To you now.
I'd like to introduce John Chatterton, who since 1997 has been Chairman of the Board of Trustees of the Walter and Eliza Hall Trust. John, we're delighted that you're here today. I invite you to say a few words.
Chairman Chris Thomas and board members of WEHI, Director of WEHI, Professor Doug Hilton, and staff members of WEHI, and my fellow members of WEHI, ladies and gentlemen. What an outstanding achievement the Institute is celebrating at this time. Arriving at the magical number of 100 years of continuous operation is a truly wonderful outcome. Very few businesses are sufficiently well managed over such a long period of time to survive the rigours of the ever-changing environment and eventually reach this milestone. As Chairman of the Walter and Eliza Hall Trust, I am thrilled to be here today to share this occasion with you. On behalf of my fellow board members and our Secretary, I congratulate you, Mr Chairman, and your Board of Directors, and Professor Doug Hilton and his current dedicated team on reaching this significant milestone. But also, let us not forget those who have made significant contributions in the past, which, when combined with those of today, have allowed the Institute to prosper and grow. And so it is today that the Institute is a world-renowned, first-class facility that works to understand and alleviate the many diseases which afflict humanity. Some of you will know the story of Walter and Eliza Hall and how the Trust and subsequently the Institute was established those many years ago. Nevertheless, I believe that on an occasion of the celebration, the particularly important and extremely infrequent occasion such as this, it is very worthwhile to reflect a little on how both our organisations came into being. Walter Hall arrived in Australia from England in 1852, aged 21 years, with very little money. His early years in the colony were unspectacular, his first employment being as a salesman at David Jones' Sydney store. However, his entrepreneurial spirit and business acumen soon rose to the fore, and his latter involvement as an agent and major shareholder of Cobb & Co within Australia marked the beginning of a number of notable achievements by this self-made man. By the time Walter married Melbourne-born Eliza Roden Kirk, some 22 years after he set foot on Australian soil, he was a man of considerable wealth. Walter Hall's greatest business venture began during the mid-1880s at Mount Morgan, which is located near Rockhampton in central Queensland. Incidentally, Mount Morgan is the place of my birth. He was one of the first shareholders, and a large one at that, of Mount Morgan Gold Mining Company Limited, and the resulting rivers of gold that flowed from that mine made Walter Hall an extremely wealthy man. Walter and Eliza were major philanthropists in a low-key way in their later lives. He died aged 80 in 1911. Eliza established the Trust in the following year in memory of her husband, but also with the hope that it would provide an example to others. Eliza allocated £1 million of her late husband's estate to establish the Walter and Eliza Hall Trust. The 2000 equivalent of £1 million is approximately $115 million. It was the Trust's Melbourne-based trustee, Richard Gardiner Casey, who was the driving force behind the establishment of the Institute. Casey was a good friend of both Walter and Eliza, and he was also the chairman of the founding board of trustees of the Trust. It was Casey who made a case for and secured the support of his fellow trustees to establish a facility which would carry out, and I quote, research work into cause and cure of human diseases, end of quote. This was in mid-1914. Casey subsequently developed relationships with the Melbourne Hospital and Melbourne University. As the details of the establishment of this fledgling organisation were finalised, Melbourne University's Professor Sir Harry Allen wrote, and I quote, "I confidently foresee such an institute as the Southern Hemisphere has never known." End of quote. How right he was. WEHI is the oldest medical research institute in Australia, and I do not need to recount to you the wonderful successes which have resulted from your past and current research undertakings. The early years of the life of the Institute were far from easy. The Trust provided support of some £60,000, about $5 million today, to the Institute in the first 20 years of its operation. It was this early funding which enabled the Institute to survive until private philanthropic and government funding was able to be secured. The Trust has continued to provide an annual donation to the Institute from the outset, admittedly For many decades, it was a token donation simply because the Trust just did not have the financial capacity to provide more. Sadly, the reality of this situation resulted in a drift in the relationship between our two organisations. And it is true to say that communication was almost non-existent for a good number of years. The Trust fortunes changed somewhat in recent years when a wonderful lady named Judy Lennox became very interested in the work of the Trust. Judy developed polio as a child and was wheelchair dependent for the last 20 years of her life. She was passionate about the type of work the Trust undertakes, and particularly in providing assistance to those who are disabled or financially disadvantaged, I should say. On her passing in 2011, the Trust received a quite substantial bequest from her estate. Judy's wishes are that these funds be used to assist those with physical disabilities, but also for research into causes and cures of diseases which result in physical disability. It is this bequest which has enabled the reinvigoration of the relationship between our two organisations. Since 2012, the Trust has committed $1.7 million to the Institute. This includes our centenary gift of $500,000 for the purchase of an influx cell sorter and a further $500,000 for the establishment of the Walter and Eliza Hall Trust Fellowship, which has been awarded to Dr. Simon Willis to support his research work in the cause of multiple sclerosis. Over the life of the Institute, the Trust has provided some $12 million in funding. In closing, may I say, the relationship between our two organisations is revitalised. We share deep historical links which the board of the Trust is most keen to maintain. We share the same name and we both are products of the legacy of Eliza Hall. I have no doubt that Eliza Hall would have been extremely proud of the manner in which the Trust has survived and prospered. She would also have been especially delighted to learn of the formation of the Institute and the truly wonderful work it has done. These following words are a quote by me, which appears in the Trust's 2012 centenary history, written by historian Dr. Kay Fraser. She particularly liked this quote regarding the relationship between our two organisations, and I quote, "It is rather like a child and its parent. The child has far outgrown its parent, but like any parent, the Trust is very proud of its offspring and its great achievements. The desire to retain the thread of attachment remains strong today." End of quote. Finally, on behalf of the trustees of the Walter and Eliza Hall Trust and our secretary, I congratulate and extend our best wishes to all at the Institute as you celebrate your centenary year. May the Institute continue to prosper to be able to celebrate many more centenaries. Thank you.
Thank you so much, John. I'd also be very grateful if you would convey the board's and the staff's thanks to the other trustees and also to Helen Cook, the Trust Secretary. I have to say it's been one of the greatest pleasures and privileges of my time as Director to get to know all of you at the Trust and also to rekindle the relationship between the Institute and the Trust. It's been a great pleasure. At the AGM, it's traditional for us to hear from one of our scientists, and I'd like today to introduce to you Associate Professor Melanie Barlow, who with Professor Ivo Mueller heads our newest division, the Division of Population Health and Immunity. Melanie.
As you all know, malaria has been a focus of the Institute's research for many years now, and so I'll just briefly say a few words about malaria. And you all know that it's a disease that affects millions of people worldwide, leading to substantial numbers of deaths and morbidity. But we also know that despite improvements and the reduction in the number of malaria cases worldwide, our treatments are beginning to fail and vaccine development is crucial. Plasmodium has and continues to evolve rapidly, and we're now seeing country and region-specific genetic mutations that will develop resistance to treatment, and that determines susceptibility to malaria, clearance rates, and development of immunity. Similar issues also arise with other diseases such as TB. So these diseases cause substantial health and economic burdens in our closest neighbours, such as Papua New Guinea and Indonesia. And going forward, they're also of increasing importance to Australia's far north. As Doug mentioned, as of the 1st of January 2015, Ivo Miller and myself are asked to form a new division, and we've named it Population Health and Immunity Division, and that kind of encapsulates researchers that have been brought together, which encompass researchers working on infectious diseases, immunologists, field researchers, and bioinformaticians such as myself. And Doug already mentioned bioinformatics and how important it was. And the essence of the work these days is that we generate an incredible amount of modern high throughput, what we call omics data, very large, highly complex data sets. And so one of those examples is what's called whole genome sequencing of the parasite that causes malaria, Plasmodium, and that's something I've been working on for a little while. But on the whole, these kinds of problems pose substantial data challenges, which is why computational biologists and bioinformaticians like myself are needed going forward. So I'll just briefly introduce you to one minor data challenge that we're currently facing. So in malaria, it is normal to collect field samples by sampling the patient's blood for Plasmodium. Unfortunately, that means you often, in countries such as Papua New Guinea, where there's a lot of malaria, often not just collecting one single sample for a Plasmodium parasite, but mixtures of parasites called clones, so mixtures of clones. So the bioinformatics challenge arises because a lot of the analysis methods and techniques really rely on having just a single clone. So we actually need to take the data and firstly identify whether we're dealing with a sample that has multiple clones, and if so, pull out the major clone in general in order to pursue further analysis. So on my final slide, I just have three images rather, of two different types of things we're doing in order to tackle this little problem. On the left is some data where Dr. Abby Harrison, who works in Dr. Eliza Barry's lab in our division, has generated some synthetic mixture data for two different Plasmodium falciparum strains, and we've been able to show that this technology indeed shows differences in the mixture sampling proportions of these two different types of strains, meaning we can use this data in order to pull apart these mixtures, and we're currently developing mathematical methods to do that. On the right, I just have some synthetic simulated data which a master's student in my lab, Mr. Stuart Lee, generated. Simulating data under ideal conditions is very useful for mathematicians in order to determine whether their algorithms are actually working the way they ought to, because we have truth. So with that, I'd just like to finish up, and I hope that's given you a small insight into what we do. Thank you.
I'd now like to introduce someone who is almost more famous than most of our scientists. All of our scientists needs no introduction to this audience, and that's our resident animator and MacArthur Fellow. I think they're actually euphemistically called MacArthur Genius Fellows, and that's Drew Berry. Drew.
Terrific. Normally I present a new animation at an AGM, but because of the 6-month thing, we're in the middle of 3 or 4 major collaborations we're doing, and hopefully in the second half of the year I'll be able to raise that, then demonstrate those projects. But for the last 20 years, I've had the tremendous privilege of being resident within WEHI and peering over the shoulder of many great scientists and being able to see what they're seeing in their research and their discoveries. Sure, the discoveries they're making are profound and are impacting society in mind-boggling ways, but it's also very beautiful when you actually see the data. And this is many, many different forms of data. So it's beautiful, but the problem is you have to look at a microscope or you have to go to someone's lab bench to see what they're working on. So with that, I would like to introduce the 6-story high illuminated artwork that has been installed in the facade of the building. It is created as part of a small part of the centenary celebrations this year. It is a unique, custom-designed installation that showcases our scientific imagery to everyone outside of WEHI. When the curtain's switched off, very much consideration of the design is that it doesn't actually impact the feel of the space inside in the front of the building, so for people operating inside the building. But when you switch it on, so this is the way the building looked before, and Colin, if you wouldn't mind going to the next slide and pressing the video, and hopefully it'll start. Okay. The design employs the multiple transparent layers and the undulating glass of the building to produce to transform the sharp, opaque metal box that the building used to be into and reveal the layers inside, an internal pillar of color and motion. It is a lighthouse beacon that draws attention to WEHI, our location, and our research. It will reveal an ever-changing roster of real scientific imagery and data that is, by its very own nature, bold, colorful, and striking. It will reveal what's going on inside the building on the outside. The luminarium will automatically turn on from 3 p.m. until 8:30 p.m. every day, and its ultimate audience, the ones that I'm really after, are the high school and university students who gather at the tram stop across the road. And also, of course, all the public commuting by in front of the building. To have their attention drawn to WEHI, to provoke wonder, to get them asking questions, what's going on over there at the Walter and Eliza Hall Institute? Because once they've done that, we have quite a story to tell them. So thank you. I hope you enjoy the Illuminarium. I hope your friends and family and your communities also enjoy the Illuminarium, because it represents truly the data, the beauty of the work that goes on here. And hopefully will provoke lots of conversation and consideration of what the Institute does.
Wow. So every day, 3:30 to 8:30. It's going to be on tonight as we exit the building? Absolutely. Excellent. Look, thank you so much, Drew. I think those of you who have attended this meeting over many years will certainly agree that Drew has not just enriched the meeting, but I think enriched the community with his beautiful animations that are both artistic and educative. I'd also like to, just at this point, acknowledge the wonderful appointment Suzanne Quarry made as director. I think we have people like Melanie Barlow here as a bioinformatician because Suzanne had the foresight to recruit Terry Speed, who spent a long part of his career, half the time in Melbourne and half the time in Berkeley. And Terry's been able to assemble a stunningly talented group of bioinformaticians and computational scientists. And I'd also like to acknowledge Suzanne's foresight in hiring Drew 17 years ago. Again, an inspired appointment. So congratulations, Drew, Terry, Melanie, bioinformaticians, but thank you, Suzanne. One of my favourite parts of the AGM, and I think one of the nicest parts of the AGM, is to be able to recognise long-serving staff members. And we have 2 staff members this year who celebrate 25 years at the Institute, 25 years of wonderful service. The first is Amanda Light. You can come up and then I can embarrass you personally. Although Amanda only looks like she's 33, she has spent 25 years here. She started at Weehigh in 1990, working for Gus. Amanda was very, very young at the time. She'd just finished year 12, just a few months out of year 12. And one of the conditions that Gus put on her employment was that she could start work here, but she had to go and get a tertiary qualification. So in 1991, she started a Bachelor of Applied Science at RMIT while working full-time as a junior technician in the Nossal laboratory. I think you were called one of Gus's angels.
I was.
We can't do that anymore. That's sexual harassment, Gus. We don't have anything like that here at the Institute anymore. Amanda worked very closely with Gus until his retirement from the Institute in 1996 and produced a remarkable wealth of data. For those of you that are scientists, she generated millions and millions of green Eliza plates in what was an exceptionally productive, focused and happy team, and Amanda was really an essential part to that. The Tarlington lab, led by David Tarlington, where are you, David? Up there, grew out of the remnants, the remains of the Nossal lab, and that, by David's very great luck and chance, included Amanda, who single-handedly helped establish all of the technologies that the lab had used in the past in David's lab. And I know that David values your expertise enormously and that you've been a really central ingredient to David blossoming as a scientist and doing outstanding work. So congratulations on being such a wonderful part of one of the great Institute teams.
Thank you very much.
And welcome to Amanda's family, and especially her daughter, who has the most wonderful pair of tights I've ever seen, that have two cats on the knees. Am I allowed to say that, Gus, or will I get into trouble for that as well? The second person I'd like to celebrate is Keith Satterley. Keith is a senior programmer in Gordon Smythe's lab in the Bioinformatics division, and one of the people we've talked about as being more and more the absolutely essential ingredients in the sort of work we do as an institute. Although I think you're a stunningly handsome man, I'm not going to give you a kiss. Keith started work in the IT department on the second floor where finance is now located. The computer room then was much, much, much smaller than the current one, but the computers were much larger. Probably had about the same power as the iPhone that went off just a few minutes ago. If that. Under Tony Kine's leadership, Keith was involved with a lot of the acquisition of the computer systems that we have, and especially the VMS computers, and he then became manager of Microsoft Windows systems in the Institute. They're the computers that the creative people don't use, right? Is that right? Or is it just the bioinformaticians that use?
Not many.
After 10 years in IT, Keith moved to Terry Speed's growing bioinformatics research group, and Keith worked on a whole lot of projects, first under Terry's guidance and then later Gordon Smythe's. I think you probably collaborated with almost everybody in the Institute, especially people that wanted little programs written to enable them to do their science much more quickly, and I know I've directly benefited from that, as have a lot of the researchers in the Institute. Keith's enjoyed fabulous relationships with lots of different departments, engineering department, the ITS group. He's helped people through the Institute, not just in research, but in some of the personal computing challenges that they've had. Keith and I also share a great joy of driving in the bush, and we always compare our four-wheel drive holiday stories. I'm entirely jealous of the holidays that Keith goes on. Keith, you've been a great contributor to the Institute. Thank you for 25 years' wonderful service. Keith also shares with Murray Jeff the fact that he's a bogan and a motorhead, And we have a wonderful print that Keith did not want wrapped. And I want to point out that the Institute does not condone advertising by tobacco companies. Thank you, mate.
Neither do I.
Now to what I think will be the absolute highlight of the AGM, and that's really the launch of a wonderful new set of scholarships, the Metcalfe scholarships. I don't need to introduce Don. Don is known to every single one of you. He's worked here for 60 years. He's been a part of probably every AGM in those 60 years. I visited Joe a couple of days ago. I know how much Joe and the family miss Don. We miss him every day, and I always look at the back left. Who's sitting in Don's seat? It's Ian Street or Terry Speed. We still look for Don up at the back left corner where he would normally sit through seminars and grumble and a little bit too loudly for politeness. We miss him dearly, but we thought that perhaps the most appropriate way to acknowledge Don was to create a set of scholarships that will in perpetuity support undergraduate students getting their first taste of research at the Institute. And the reason why that's special will become apparent at the end. The Metcalfe scholarships will provide funding worth $6,000. $5,000 will go to the laboratory that are hosting the students to help defray the cost of the research, and $1,000 will go to the student. I should say they also get paid for working in the Institute, so that's not the only pay they get. But an extra $1,000 will go to the students along with a beautifully designed medallion that has Don's profile on it. I really want to thank more than 100 alumni, donors, scientists and staff members who've contributed to the Metcalfe Scholarship Fund. The support for that fund was just remarkable, and at times for me, as I saw the money coming in, really overwhelming. I'm not going to name everybody, but I want to name a number of very major donors to that fund. I'd especially like to acknowledge our President Chris Thomas and his wife Cheryl, extraordinarily generous alumni, Professor David Gearing and Julie Gearing and their family, another alumni, George Morstan and Rosa Morstan, CSL, who have been a long-time partner and were, I think, the first call that I had to match Chris Thomas's generous gift, and Bruce Teal. The other donors that I wanted to mention, I'm only going to mention one more, was I received a cheque for a few $100s from the staff that work at the Q Mouse Rooms. Among our more lowly paid staff, but a group who, within a day or so of announcing the fund, wanted to contribute because they knew how much Don meant to the Institute and they'd personally enjoyed working with him. Tonight, I'm very proud to be awarding the first 3 Metcalfe scholarships. They're to 3 outstanding undergraduate students that we consider ourselves lucky as having in the Institute. But first, what I wanted to do was to play a brief video where Don reflects on his time as an undergraduate student and the importance of mentors.
Well, I began as a medical student immediately after World War II in a class of 600, and during that course I broke off for a year to do a medical science degree. I joined a department with 2 quite eccentric professors who did no experiments, wrote no papers, wrote no grant applications, and you might think wouldn't have taught me much about doing research. But in fact, what they did do was spend long hours discussing with me as an equal what was latest in scientific journals and seeking my opinion and thoughts. And for a young, faceless student, this was an electrifying experience. I think whether or not mentorship works depends really on the quality of those being mental, if they are receptive, then it's some very powerful influence.
What I'd like to do is ask Kimberly, Madeline and Adam to come up, come around this side, and on the way through here, I just want to introduce you to Joe and Mary Ann. So, Mary Ann, Kimberly.
Hi, congratulations.
Joe and Joe. Maddie and Adam. Come over this side, and now I can embarrass you three. I think one of the things I started as an undergraduate student here in 1986, and I was absolutely fortunate to be supervised formally by Nick Nicola, who one of the most generous mentors, but worked every day with Nick and Don. And I think what Don said there was really my lived experience at the Institute as an undergraduate. The thing I loved about the Institute, and the thing that I hope still permeates through the whole Institute, was that as you walk in as an undergraduate, and I pinched myself every day I was walking in here, the expectation was you were here to do a job. For me, it wasn't the last part of my university degree or something that I did just as, you know, a fill-in time for a day here and day there if I didn't have contact hours. Don and Nick and everybody at the Institute treated you as exactly the same way as they would any other researcher coming in, and that was that although you were inexperienced, you were here to make discoveries. And I found that one of the most motivating and empowering things in my life. Certainly changed my life. I don't think I would have ever become a researcher if I hadn't had that experience with Don and Nick as an undergraduate. And these three students, although they're young, I think are walking in those same footsteps, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about each of them, but I'm sure they're absolutely destined for great things. So Kimberly first. Welcome, Kimberly Callaghan. Kimberly's studying Bachelor of Science at Melbourne University. She's in third year. She's majoring in chemistry and biochemistry, an outstanding combination, if I do say so myself. She worked initially as a summer student in Jeff Babin's lab last summer on a project that would have been really close to Don's heart, and that was understanding how blood cells are developed and controlled at a molecular level. And that was really a program started by Don 55 or 60 years ago. She's also worked as a research assistant in an organic chemistry group at Bio21, and Kimberly, we think you're destined for great things. It's my pleasure to introduce our second Metcalf Scholar, and that's Madeline Dawson. Maddie started at WeHi in February this year in Marnie Blewett's lab, but came from a slightly different route. She's only in the first year of her science degree, but the third year at Melbourne University. For the first couple of years, she started out doing a Bachelor of Contemporary Music after achieving a stunningly good VCE score, especially for kids that go into the VCA. She was valedictorian of her high school, and her trumpeting prowess was recognised as part of Top Sounds, which are the showcase for the top students in VCE music. After 18 months of her music degree, where she shone, Maddie transferred, and I'm very glad about this, to a Bachelor of Science degree. In her first semester, she had an average of 94 in chemistry, genetics and calculus, and then over the summer she did a second year chemistry subject where she got 95. Stunning marks. We're really delighted that you're at the Institute, and just like Kimberly, we know you're going to do great things. And we do have some young men at the Institute. And one of them is our third Metcalf Scholar, Adam Lipsick. And after obtaining almost a perfect ATAR score from Woodley School, Adam studied microbiology and immunology at Melbourne University. He's currently in his third year. He has absolutely exemplary academic grades across many subjects. He was awarded the Science Faculty Prize and the Macfarlane Burnett Prize for Biological Sciences at Ormond College. I'm guessing it was at Ormond College. Yep. He grounds his academic interest by being a volunteer surf lifesaver and a mentor to Indigenous students, and he plays a whole host of sports, almost all related to water, except for synchronised swimming. I'm glad about that. I would have started to worry. Adam also has his pilot licence, but with both parents working as doctors, his real passion is to do medical research, and I'm sure that research will impact treatment of human infectious disease, which is what you're interested in. The Metcalfe Scholarship will help Adam pursue a research project aimed at identifying new therapies for dengue fever virus infection and hepatitis, and he's working with one of the people that I mentioned, Greg Ebert and Mark Pellegrini. Adam, congratulations. Thank you to the three of you. This is going to be an annual event. We're going to advertise these a little more widely for the first batch of Metcalfe scholars. We looked among the many undergraduates that we have working at the Institute already and chose in a very objective way those three that had the best academic marks in their previous semester at Melbourne University, and that's the way we will choose them in the future. But from now on, what we'll also do is advertise ahead so that we can perhaps flush out some more exceptionally talented students like these three for the next set of Metcalfe Scholarship Awards that we will do at the next annual general meeting. And I hope it becomes part of the WeHi tradition and a true highlight of what we do at the Institute. I think that concludes the AGM, and I'd like to... Doesn't conclude the AGM. What have I done wrong? I've got my pieces of paper mixed up. You have to say something. You have to conclude it. Sorry. Oh, the President's job. Can I wait here?
You can.
Okay.
Yes, I think so. I haven't read all the instructions, Doug, but...
I almost got there.
I know.
Unscathed.
We tried. Ladies and gentlemen, it's my role to conclude the annual meeting. And to thank everyone for attending. But I have to also make some very brief announcements. First, the guests attending the Institute's members' dinner need to depart at 6:30 for University House, and for those who don't know where it is or don't have a GPS, there are maps available in the foyer. Second, and very importantly, I have to ask past directors or the families of past directors, Metcalfe Scholarship winners and long service awardees to remain in the Davis Auditorium, which is where we are for photographs. And thirdly, and perhaps most importantly, invite all guests to move into the Tapestry Lounge outside for light refreshments. Thank you very much.